All right. Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to the first episode of the Hizzy Hustle, where we're going to be taking a dive into real estate, housing markets, financial situations, politics, economy, gaming, you name it. We'll be talking about it. Today we got the CREA 2025 housing forecast that I think I'll be taking a quick dive into. Let's just get into it.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I'm Janice Myers. I'm the CEO of the Canadian Real Estate Association.
The director of our data team at CREA, and one of the things our data team does is we aggregate and distribute housing data. So my name is Sean, as Valerie just said. I'm the director of our data team at CREA, and one of the things our data team does is we aggregate and distribute housing data like CMHC does, like the Canadian Housing Statistics Program does. And the data that we publish, it comes from MLS systems of real estate boards and associations across Canada. So it's your sales, your listings, the balance of demand and supply, and time on market, et cetera, and of course home prices. This is backward-looking data. We published some this morning, but this forecast is to look forward at what that might look like in 2025, not just our data, but how it affects sort of the entire housing space and continuum. So now before I get into that, I'll address the elephant in the room, which is a potential trade war with the United States and how that might affect things. In terms of how that's incorporated into this forecast, since it's not policy yet, it is filed under risks, which I'll get to later. In terms of the risks that these numbers could be very different, perhaps not so long from now, but we don't know that yet.
Number I've been hearing on this one is apparently 3% for tariffs that are coming on Monday, but we will see. You heard it here first.
So we're going off of the consensus for things like in terms of our assumptions, what feeds our models of economic growth, population growth, household income growth, mortgage rates. There's more that I'm forgetting. In terms of what we're assuming on those, it's kind of ho-hum for some of them. Weak economic growth, but not a recession. Steady employment growth, but nothing to write home about. And not great income growth either. So everything's weakly positive. It sort of has a neutral effect on housing. The big factors are, one, mortgage rates. We don't need to assume anything about them because they've already gone down, but what we can assume is that they're going to hit a bottom this year, and that's critical. I think there's one more cut penciled in for the entire year at this point. So, and that's important as a signal to Canadian potential buyers who like to lock in fixed rate mortgages that they're not going down anymore in terms of bringing them off the sidelines. And the big assumption we have is that there is a record amount of...
So that's a big one when it comes to loan potentials, because a lot of people feel super, super uncertain as to where their money's going to be, what their money is going to be worth in the next little bit. So to have a little bit of confidence to know that you're not going to be missing out here if you lock in, that's a good sign.
Demand out there on the sidelines, waiting to come back in, waiting for those certain things like lower rates and like inventory to be available for them. And we think that a good chunk of that is going to come off the sidelines this year. So that really forms the basis of the forecast itself. I'm going to get into some numbers. I think before I do, though, I'd like to just remind everyone where we are. So if you look at the number of months of inventory, this is over almost 30 years for all of Canada. It's a really great measure of both demand and supply in one number. You can see how housing cycles between buyers markets and sellers markets rarely stays in the middle. And you can see where we are, where we've been over the last 2 years coming out of COVID. This market never went back to where it was 10 years ago, which was almost a buyer's market, where it was in the 90s, which was a decade-long buyer's market. We went into hibernation, and we've been sitting in that seller's market zone this entire time, which is why prices really didn't fall much, say for the rate at the beginning. And of course,
this is kind of nationwide. This isn't necessarily specific to the Okanagan, because the Okanagan has been in a considered to be a buyer's market for the last year or so because we have so much inventory.
If you expect that to change overnight, it's not going to, because housing cycles are long. So, from the housing boom of the early 2000s way up to the sort of soggy market that we had in the 20-teens, and then about 10 years, you can see, took us to get down where we are today. It wasn't just COVID. COVID was a turbocharger, and but this housing crisis and this seller's market lack of inventory hasn't gone anywhere. So you break out that most recent months of inventory number, so measured 15 days ago by region, because a big part of our forecast is the differences by region right now, which are vast. That's the number of months of inventory 15 days ago across the country. And that red line is where a seller's market would be in each of those provinces, okay? So if you look at Canada, like I said, we're very close to that mark already. It's not going to take much in the way
I'm not seeing these stats
of
either,
buyers
by the way,
coming off the sidelines to put us back below that red line. On the cool side, we have BC and Ontario. So they're way off doing their own thing compared to the rest of the country right now. It's almost the reverse of what we've been used to the last 10 years, where they've got lots of inventory. That months of inventory number is about 2 or 2.5 months above where a seller's market would be. So they've got a lot of runway for buyers to come back into that market and start to absorb inventory before buyers start running into each other and competing prices up. So a big component of our forecast is more sales in BC and Ontario that have a lot of recovering to do and not much on the price side. Now, if you flip to the prairies and Quebec and the East Coast,
which isn't necessarily true with a lot of the markets around here, because with the single family homes that are for sale, if they're good quality and they're the type that people want, they're going in multiple offers. So it's not necessarily the way that things are. It's more of the generalization, because with townhouses and condos, there's a lot of those for sale right now, and not very many people are looking for them.
It's the opposite. They are all already sellers markets today. Prices are rising in almost all of those places already, and we think that that's going to accelerate. If you look at the prairies, one of the things there is we don't expect much in the way of sales growth there, because they're already setting sales records and inventories are at a 20-year low. So there's not a lot of scope for that. But we do expect, if for every 10 buyers, there might be only 5 houses. So, and that price growth is already going on. We expect strongest price growth in some of those parts of the country. And for Quebec and the East Coast, they're sort of a hybrid. They're all sellers markets based on their own history, but they have more inventory. So their prices are rising, but there's scope for sales to rise too. So that's the basis of how we think it's going to shake out across the country. Here are the numbers. Canada, we expect sales over MLS systems to go back over a 500,000 mark this year. It's an 8.6% increase, so fairly large in magnitude. We're fairly confident in this call. And like I said, driven mostly by BC and Ontario that have the most recovering to do to get back to normal, which they will eventually. And that's what that looks like compared to a 45-year history of sales in Canada. If I throw a trend line on there, you can see that in boom times it goes a little bit above, in slow times it goes a little bit below, and you'll note that in the last 2 years is the lowest below normal we have ever been. So that's where the recovery story is. We got some climbing back to do, and we're not thinking we're going to get there in the next couple of years. Obviously, the red lines there are 2025 and 2026 forecast. And on the price side, we think that the average price in Canada for all of Canada is going to be about $722,000 this year, which would be up 4.7% from all of 2024. But for perspective, that's already happening. So I think to start the year, we're at about $700,000 already compared to we started the year last year at $670,000. So it's already rising. So this isn't as big of a call. It's not. We don't expect this to start to happen tomorrow. It's already underway. BC and Ontario, matching inflation only. They've got the lowest price growth for the reasons I've already described. And everywhere else sort of between 4 and 8%, with Alberta and Quebec actually above 8% price growth, and potentially even more, because these are some hot markets right now.
Yeah, Calgary.
And what does that look like compared to history? Well, sometimes prices go up and often they go flat. They don't really go down often. But we think that the conditions are right for them to go up again this year. Obviously, this being in nominal dollars, it makes the forecast, the newer data, look like a bigger deal compared to 3 decades ago. Mm-hmm. But if you break this out on a year-over-year basis and look at the year-over-year growth that we're forecasting, it's a lot more reasonable. This is actually a very conservative forecast right now, and it's conservative for the reasons that there's a lot of risks out there. There's some to the high side, but obviously, as I mentioned, there's big ones to the downside. And so with no data in yet for 2025 and no policy yet in terms of Canada-U.S. trade, we're being conservative. And that's the end of the slideshow portion. At the end of forecast, when you say your assumptions and your risks, assumptions and numbers, then you hit the risks, right? And so I'm going to give you 2. One is to the high side. If there is as much demand out there as we think there is after years of record, and I mean really record, if you haven't seen it, you should look into the data, population growth, and the fact that the biggest demographic cohort in Canada is people aged 25 to 35 by a country mile. Makes the younger baby boomers look like nothing. They were dominant in that population histogram for so many years. So it's all out there, but it hasn't been manifesting itself in our data or in the new home data. So but we think it's ready to go. And so the risk is if they're looking for the best interest rate they're going to get, which is soon, and they're looking for a whole bunch of inventory to come out, which is April, and they're looking for the lowest home price they're going to get, which is now, because they're already rising everywhere, the longer you wait. The risk is that we get, what we used to think was 2 or 3 years of demand trickling out, all showing up 3 or 4 months from now. And the downside risk, of course, is a major trade war with the United States and all the associated negative economic consequences that would have for Canada's economy, for people's jobs and their abilities to pay their mortgages, and for uncertainty, which is a huge housing market killer because, if you're not sure about your employment next year, you're not going to go out and sign a contract for 25 years and borrow $500,000.
100%. And I have been trying to make this point for a while now, where I think a lot of people are like, oh, I wonder like how's the interest rates are doing, or that type of thing. But I think a lot of it is just straight up what people think the economy is going to do. They are very unsure of what's going to be happening over the next few months, and given the fact that we don't have a very strong government mandate at the moment, people are definitely nervous. And yeah, Monday's going to come and we'll see what happens. But the trade war could definitely potentially harm all of these growth numbers that we're expecting to see this year. So fingers crossed. 3% would be I think it would be a hit that we could take. But if they go for the full 25, then we're playing on the back foot.
Right. So that's the risks. So think of it as a fan of possibilities that's wider than normal. And with my last couple of minutes here, that's the forecast. I would like to talk a little bit about another piece of the housing market in 2025, which is with a federal election coming, what are we going to be talking about? We're still in this housing crisis. It has not gone anywhere. So I'd like to talk about two things. We talk all the time about how many units we're short, and it's a really big number. It's really daunting, and it can be depressing if you think about it too much. So I want to talk about, okay, we got to get this done. We know how many, but what are we going to build, and how are we going to do it? I think that needs to be the next thing in the conversation this year. So let me hit the first one. What are we going to build? 20 years ago, we had a housing and building boom in Canada. We were building a lot of homes for a long time, and more than half of them were traditional single detached homes. Over that 20 years, the single detached home is basically now on the endangered species list in Canada. And we talked a great game about...
Which is a great point to make, too, because now all these new developments and everything that are going in, they're not single-family homes. It seems like single-family homes now are something that you custom build. Like, they're just not being built in developments anymore. So, you have duplex, you got townhomes, you got condos, but, single-family dwellings, they're becoming an extinct race, and they're the thing that people seem to want the most, right? So how are we going to fix that issue?
Replacing it with something called the missing middle. And you can see the problem is that the word missing is still there. We didn't do that at all. We shot right through, and we built initially a whole bunch of smaller and smaller apartment condos to make up those missing units so that we could still say that we were setting records. And in the last decade, there's been a massive explosion, I think a lot of people don't know this, in purpose-built rental apartments. It's the dominant category of completions right now.
And to his point as well, especially in the Okanagan here where I'm from, we had a bunch of purpose-built condos for Airbnbs done in Kelowna, and there was 2 towers worth of them. People sunk hundreds of thousands of dollars into these units, and then the government turned around and axed and banned all Airbnbs. So now you have these people that are they're stuck with these immovable condos essentially, because no one wants to buy a king suite essentially from a hotel room. Like, you get a kitchenette, you don't even have a full kitchen.
Now, great homes, I'm sure, for our households, and we're getting a lot of housing built. That's good, but not a substitute for starting and raising a family in. And that's why the stories are people moving from Ontario to Alberta in droves. David Coletto from Abacus Data has a great stat on that. What the most common age for people moving from Ontario to Alberta is in the last couple of years? The most common age. Do you think it's 27? Do you think it's 33? You know what it is? 0. It's infants. It's young people that are having their first kid and saying, I can't raise this kid in a one-bedroom apartment. I can't afford anything else. I got daycare coming next year. We're out of here. I think that that missing middle conversation is a huge one. And how do we get it built is the next question, right? So CMHC says we need 3.5 million more homes by 2030, over and above the maybe optimistically 1.5 million we're on track to build. That's a lot. It's optimistic because that's to rewind the affordability story back to 20 years ago. The Parliamentary Budget Officer says 1.4 million more homes just to catch up before we start to keep up. So let's go with the lower number. That's double our construction. How do you do that? Do you double capacity, double the number of carpenters and laborers and construction workers and plumbers and electricians and roofers? No, that's not going to happen. In fact, we already have a labor
No, and that's a perfect example of like the snake eating its own tail, where we have this essential labor shortage where we need to have all these skilled laborers come in to build the homes that we're missing. But what are we going to do with all the people that need to come here to build the homes? Right? We're already missing the housing, and now we're taking in all these extra people to house. It's just it's an ongoing issue that can't be fixed, it seems, with the way that we're approaching it currently.
And it's going to get worse because more people are going to be retiring in the next decade than we're bringing in. There's the idea that we could use the immigration system, which is a good idea, and we can still do that. But, that's going to run up against lower immigration targets. And so really what we want to talk about this year is offsite construction and new technologies, mass timber, panelization, modular. You could build houses a lot faster if we do it the way we do cars. And I'll leave it there on sort of an optimistic note.
Modular home building is going to be the new way to do things. There's no way around it. It just makes more sense. It's something that you can monitor better. You don't have to put people out in the elements, consistently producing the same type of product. It just all in all, it just seems like it's so much better of a way to go.
That there's, we haven't tried these things yet, and that could be the future, and that could be the way that you actually get millions of homes built. So happy to take questions.
Hi, Jordan Galling, Financial Post. You mentioned the problem with condo construction, how the demand just doesn't seem to be there anymore for those types of homes. Are you foreseeing at all a condo market crash in 2025?
We're not looking for a condo market crash. I think that the amount of demand that's out there and the fact that interest rates are going down could bring some buyers back. It could take the pressure off of people that are renting them out that haven't been able to pass those higher costs onto their tenants.
People will always still need starter properties. So if they can put these condos and create a market that allows people to have some growth, that they can get their money in and move into something better, then maybe they still can. But the way things are going right now, no one wants these condos because they don't think they can do anything with them. You can't rent them out, can't sell them.
So I think that that's going to take a lot of pressure off of everything. But another way I'd answer that question, and this actually, I'd sort of relate it back to what I was talking about with technology is, if you're, one of the things with mass timber is you can build these big apartment buildings way faster. And if you build them way faster, in the pre-sale stage, you're going to get end user or owner occupiers buying them as opposed to investors. And when the money changes hands between the developer and the end user, you're not going to end up with 450 square foot condos. Right? So, but the ones that exist, they're people are having problems selling them because people don't particularly like living in them.
Housing will obviously probably still be an issue that's discussed in the upcoming election. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has made some suggestions, including slashing the GST for homes under $1 million. But then,
I cannot believe they didn't vote this through in December. They had a chance, and they voted no.
he'll probably cut the Housing Accelerator Fund and other sort of programs that have been implemented. What do you think of that? Do you think that'll have a material impact on home building?
Well, I'm not going to comment on what he might do, but the idea of slashing the GST on homes under $1 million, yes, that will have an effect. Every time that they cut the GST, when they did it for purpose-built rental, a whole bunch of developers said, well, now we're going to build purpose-built rental. Condo developers, they were like, that makes a lot of sense. That amount of money is a huge, it really does move the market.
100%.
And so
100%, because people look at homes that they need to pay GST on, and they look at it as an addition on to the price that they already have to pay. It is never a consideration that it's, oh, we know we have to pay tax on this. When you tell them it's an $800,000 home plus GST, it was always an $800,000 home. You're better off telling them it's $750 at that point, or whatever, right? Like, if it's $50,000 on $1 million, you tell them it's $950, because, or you tell them it's $1 million, even though it's $950, right? Like, when you add that money on, even if you know that you have to pay it, they will always see it that way.
Oh, if you're going to do it in the in that ownership space as well, I do think that would have a material impact. Yes.
So the current administration of Mr. Trudeau had taken a lot of efforts to increase housing supply and meet that kind of a demand that CMHC has been talking about. Have you seen any substantial change in the housing market because of that?
So here's the tricky part. Those policies are all great. I think that we need to do more, like I said, like some major sort of national project level stuff, like inventing an entire new industry to build that pace. In terms of the impact of those policies, the problem is that they're probably washed away or counteracted by the surge in interest rates to fight inflation. So it's really hard. So I think coming out of the inflation crisis, that's when you might see the impact of some of those policies going forward, especially with more buyers coming into the new home space. So you got more demand, more money going to developers, and then being able to take advantage of some of those programs that maybe everyone was kind of on the sidelines with rates so high the last couple of years. So it's kind of hard to disentangle those things.
But these policies mainly were actually announced in in 2024, the first half, let's say, till the time the budget was there, and a few after that. And by that time, we had also started seeing the interest rates coming down. So aren't these policies really having some kind of a substantial impact in terms of increasing the supply, bringing the buyers back and all? The policies, I mean, I know the interest rate is helping some buyers coming back, but what about these policies?
It's really, like I said, it's hard to disentangle because interest rates are such a huge factor here that it sort of washes over everything else. And also, to your point, like it's also too early to tell. The point at which interest rates are going to really bring buyers back, and that's part of our forecast, is when they stop falling. Because as long as they're still falling.
Yeah, and right now, when people are unaware of how many more interest rates are coming, I think to his point that he made earlier that if it does slow down, and they are pretty specific that there's only going to be one more scheduled rate cut, starting next year, people are going to be a lot more okay with taking out loans because they know they're not going to get shafted like back when we did in 2022, right? Like I bought my first place with my wife in 2022 in January or February. By the end of the year, we rode the wave with the variable, went from 1.45 to 705. It's crazy.
People are going to wait, right? So it's hard to answer that question. But I think that all of those policies, every single one that I've seen announced, I'm like, good, that helps.
Okay. In terms of interest rates, now we've been talking to a lot of people and they were saying that the 5-year fixed term interest rates, they are usually linked to the long-term bond markets, and even though the interest rates are coming down, that has not really changed much. It has come down, but not so much. So do you think that will continue to fall further and will bring the people back, or it will be almost more or less the same at the same place?
Yeah, the way it normally works is, you're exactly right. The say the 5-year rate that a lot of Canadians typically liked up until COVID, and I think will like again, is based on the bond market, and the bond market gets way out in front of what the central bank is going to do. So, for example, I'll give you a perfect example going back a few years. When markets got wind that the central banks were going to raise rates really quickly in 2022, that 5-year rate shot higher even before the Bank of Canada had even done one rate hike. So the spread between the fixed and variable was like 2%. That's why so many people were taking variable rates at the worst time, because they were able to pass the stress test because it was such a differential. On the way down, you have the opposite. The 5-year gets out in front of what the bank cuts. So the 5-year was falling quite some time ago. So it's going to bottom out first. And then the jockeying between fixed and variable, that'll be left to that'll sort itself out in the next few months in terms of where that actually lands. Because the variable is probably going to drop down below, and the 5-year might not change. So the 5-year might be about where it's going to be right now.
So the 5-year
I'm
term rate, 5-year fixed
pretty
rate
confident. I'm pretty confident that the 5 year is not going to drop. If it drops down into the threes, I'll be surprised. But I'm expecting it to stay around where it's at right now.
is more or less going out of fashion. Is that correct?
No, I think it's coming back into fashion. During COVID, there was so much uncertainty. People didn't want to take that long a horizon, even though like it was, spring 2021 was the absolute best time. If I was advising someone, I would said you should have locked in for 10 years because you're never going to see rates like that again. But coming out of COVID, initially when people were told rates aren't going to change, and then they changed really rapidly, people were taking a much shorter horizon, 2 and 3 year fixed rates. Going variable initially in 2021 and 2022, and a lot of people got burned on that, and then they started taking 2 and 3 year fixed rates because they knew rates were going to come down eventually, and they didn't want to be locked in until 2028 when everyone else was getting these low.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer that if you kind of graph it out in any given situation on a 5 year period, they tend to be pretty close. The difference is whether or not you're able to ride the flexibility wave when it comes to having really high payments and then the low payments. Because when the payments are low, it is really nice.
Rates that we have now. So I think now once we hit a bottom and we're at neutral, so as long as nothing goes wild again, that's about where the Bank of Canada wants to keep it. Then you can feel confident to lock in for a 5 year. And I think that's going to bring a lot of conservative Canadians, and not conservative politically, but Canadians tend to be conservative with their money and go for that 5 year. I think that's going to bring a lot of people back into the market, feeling comfortable to do that again.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you see the 5 year fixed rate settling down? Let's say once we reach the terminal rate, basically, of Bank of Canada.
Geez, it's been so long since I renewed my mortgage, because it's not the posted rate, but it's the discounted rate, and that depends on how much business you do with your lender and your credit score and all that. But I don't know. I'm not sure what it is now. 3.5 might be one that you could get, which is a good. That's a normal interest rate from before the wild up and downs, right? So
this will be a good rate for actually getting the buyers back into the market.
It'll be better than it was, but it won't be what it was. I mean, interest rates aren't going back to what they were for the.
We're not ever going to see a situation like that again. Not for a while, or not unless something crazy happens. But if it does happen, we got bigger things to worry about at that point, I think.
Last 15 years, right? But going back to the financial crisis, they're not going that low, and home prices are still quite a bit higher than they were before COVID. So affordability has improved from last year, but affordability is still tougher than it has been for 20 years. So it will bring some buyers back, but we're not going back to COVID levels of activity.
I have a few more, but John, if you want to ask.
Yeah, I just have one question.
Sure.
So interest rates shot up in the past couple of years and have only come down more or less recently. Do you have any information on foreclosures or forecasts on foreclosures?
Yeah, I do. This is a surprising one, actually. We look for that when we look at mortgage arrears in Canada. So 90-day arrears, people aren't able to pay their mortgage. And if you look at that over the entire history, it started back in the 90s way up here and went straight down. It hit a rock bottom it basically rounded to zero in the fall of 2022.
It's another great point that he's bringing up too, because we seem to have thought that there was going to be this massive bubble of extra foreclosures or just people not being able to pay their mortgages or refinance when it came time, because they were just getting so stretched with their money, right? And if the value of the home went down in the future and you try to refinance on a mortgage that's too high, it's going to be really tough, right? So a lot of these people might potentially have issues refinancing. But now, I don't really know how it comes into play when it comes to value, but when you finish your term and you go to remortgage or refinance or whatever, you don't have to requalify. So that's huge when it comes to people that are stressed for, potentially having to requalify if something were to happen with their job or anything in the time period, right? As long as they were able to pay their mortgage, they should be able to get another one.
It's since ticked up about that much. So mortgage arrears in Canada, Canadians pay their mortgages. There's no evidence of almost any of that at all. Now, having said that, people that locked in really low rates during COVID for 5 years started that in the summer of 2020, meaning the first renewals from COVID level fixed rates and fixed rates with variable rates with fixed payments, which are the scary ones, start this summer. So that's that mortgage renewal cliff that was doesn't happen until 6 months from now, that the bank was very worried about, and that could lead to some of that activity. But that's looking a lot better now that rates have come down so fast. 9 months ago, rates were expected to take 3 years to get down, and now we're basically there today. So.
Okay. So, a lot of these realtors are saying that the pre-construction sales are not happening at all. And if you continue with this trend, then eventually in the next 3 to 4 years, the constructions of new homes will actually plummet. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing this kind of a trend, and what does it really mean for the housing crisis? Because we actually need to build homes, right?
I think that there's an expression for that about looking at things in the present and extrapolating it out into the future. This market, the Canadian housing market, is if any problem it has, is too much demand. But the whole thing went to sleep for the last 2 years, and it's only barely waking up now. I mean, that's our forecast, that's going to happen starting 3 months from now. It was an interest rate story. They were way down, but they went way up, put everything to sleep. That's why, and when they come down, it'll start up again. I'm very confident in that. Maybe not at the level that we saw during the pandemic, but that's a good thing, because that was too much demand for the supply we had. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. I think that it's going to come back. I don't think you can't look at housing during an inflation crisis and then say over the next 3-4 years when the inflation crisis is over. So I would be less concerned about that. But
are you confident that more construction is already happening at its peak? I mean, we haven't really seen this kind of a construction happening at all, but we still need more, as you also said, that 3.5 CMHC, PBO says 1.4 or something. Mm-hmm. Do you think we can actually achieve that? I mean, that's because that is what we need to resolve this housing crisis. Can we really actually resolve the housing crisis?
You know what? I didn't ask you to ask that question, but I'm glad you did. Because I was running short on time there, and I did cut a little bit out at the end, where I did want to talk a little bit more about some of those, like building houses like we build cars. You imagine offsite construction in a factory where automation and machinery and robotics are doing so much of the work and overcoming that labor challenge, where it doesn't matter if it's minus 30 in a blizzard outside. It doesn't matter if it's between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. You could build housing way faster than double if you were doing it that way. Got that going and kept it going.
Unfortunately, there needs to be a big swing change in construction, and there just needs to be just a massive industry shift if you want to see this happen. Because if people just deny it and they want to, they can just essentially replace the entire trade workforce with people who are willing to work in these assembly lines. And if you have it well enough situated that potentially, ticketed tradesmen don't have to actually do the work because it's been so roboticized, and if it's a manufacturer standard, then that could potentially be good enough as well, right? So if they don't necessarily, or if people don't get on board with this type of thing, then that could, who knows what could happen, right?
Going and sort of blast that out all over Canada. Mass timber is another really promising technology where you could put up these mid-rise buildings with great missing middle, big apartments in the space of 1 or 2 years as opposed to 5 or 6, and it's a lot more friendly on the environment than concrete. So that's where I sort of ended optimistically, that I do think we can do that, but not by scaling the status quo, the way that we built, the way my grandfather did in 1940. We need a technological revolution to solve this problem. And it's sitting right in front of us. We don't have to invent it. We just have to find the political will and money to make it happen.
And what kind of policies would enable that to happen?
That is a great question. Can I come back next year and answer that? I don't claim...
The realtor's crystal ball, man. Don't we all wish we had one? We'd be freaking rich.
Be an expert on this stuff, but I've been watching this forever. We were on that "we just need to build more homes" story 8 years ago. And I think the next phase of that is okay, how do you do it? And then the next phase of that is, okay, where do we put these things? So we're fairly new into the offsite construction and technological revolution material story. 3D printing. I didn't even mention that. So I'm not an expert in that. I'm hoping to tour some factories this year and get a better idea.
That'd be awesome.
because to know what the policies need to be, you have to get into the weeds of what the challenges are and why this is only 2 to 3% of construction. Whenever I go and talk about it, everyone's like, this makes so much sense. You know, the analogy people love is, you know, if you ordered a new car, you wouldn't expect a bunch of people show up in your driveway with 4 tires and an engine parts and sheet metal and start banging together a Toyota Camry. But that's in a blizzard. But that's how we build a lot of our housing still. So I'm optimistic because
if you're talking about efficiency, it is the least efficient way to build a home, because I have been a part of a trade and I did it for 10 years. I built a lot of homes around the Okanagan and in a lot of different weather conditions. And I'm telling you, when it is not optimal, it doesn't go as fast as it should. So if you can eliminate, especially the elements, like people hate getting freaking hot, sweating their asses off, being in the rain, being too cold. It's just, there is no way that you are going to work as best as possible and as efficient as possible in that type of situation. It's just not going to happen. So if you can eliminate those issues, bring in some automation and start building faster, that is going to completely revolutionize how we build homes here.
It's right there. And in fact, I've often joked I should be making money on this. It's going to blow up. But
I will be making some investments in companies that are startups for this type of stuff. It's just, if the legislation goes for it, then I guarantee you there's money to be made in this.
We're not there yet. It's got to get it into the conversation first.
We have time for a few questions online, if there's any. Nous avons le temps pour quelques questions en ligne.
This is a great live stream.
Please use the raise hand function.
Well, I'm doing the live stream. This is a video. This video is about a week old.
Rachel, the floor is yours.
I'm just doing it now because I'm starting a live stream now. It seems like the perfect thing to start with. Beginning of the year, 2025. A little bit of a market forecast.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes,
Hi,
we can
Rachel.
hear you.
Hi.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, how are you?
Good yourself?
Oh,
Good,
fantastic.
good, thanks. So you're predicting a pretty significant jump in demand. Is most of that demand coming from end users, or will there be any investor demand?
We don't really break that out, but I'm expecting end users. I'm expecting a lot of first-time homebuyers. With the massive amount of household formation and international migration we've seen.
Well, and there's a huge transfer of wealth that's happening. And then on top of it, it's the downsizing, right? It's all the baby boomers with no more kids that are potentially looking to get out of their house. But, you know, how are they going to do that? Are they going to sell it and make a bunch of money, or are they going to, you know, pass it off to their kids that can't afford to maybe buy a house? Or are they going to live in the house with their kids? Like, I'm really, really curious to kind of see how this all ends up playing out over the next 10 years, because, we put ourselves in a pretty interesting situation here.
You know, the number of people that turn 30 every year that have been stuck not being able to buy a home, I do see it being a lot of first-time buyers.
And that's another one that's crazy too, because I just turned 30 last year, and I live in a place where a lot of the people that are my age that grew up around here aren't able to really afford buying into first-time homes anymore, right? Like, that opportunity kind of passed if you didn't make any housing investments or other investments. If you were able to kind of ride the wave of inflation, you're looking okay. But yeah, if this is something that you're looking to get into new, and like especially, you know, the high school kids that are graduating around nowadays, you know, over the next 5 to 10 years, what are they going to be looking at when it comes to housing prices? Like, some people are just defeated before they even start trying.
Okay, and then on your comment on condos, on how people are having a hard time selling them because no one wants to buy them, because no one wants to live in them, who do you think will buy those condos that are out on the market right now?
That's a good question. Maybe someone that likes living in 450 square feet. I'm sure there's some.
450 square feet. It was a little bit of a tongue twister. You're good, Sean.
Thank you. Next question will be from Wolfgang Dippner. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, again.
Excellent. Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned BC and Ontario as outliers in the Canadian real estate market. Can you describe Can you describe BC's exceptionalism in more detail? How does that manifest itself? And what are the policy implications for government here? Housing, of course, is a big issue. Was a big election issue. Can you sort of describe BC's exceptionalism and what flows from that? Thank you.
Sure. Can you just repeat BC's exceptionalism in terms of what?
Yeah, exceptionalism. You described it earlier as an outlier in terms of what BC and Ontario are doing in terms of their own market relative to the rest of the Canadian market.
Okay, gotcha. Simple answer, they're way more expensive. And so when rates go from 0 to 5% on the overnight rate, those markets suffer way more. There are markets, Calgary, it's like they didn't get the memo that there was an inflation crisis, but these are places where you can still get homes from $300,000 and $400,000 and $500,000. The average home price for the entire province of British Columbia is $1 million.
Yeah,
and so it's
insane.
much more interest rate sensitive. Sales fell way more in BC and Ontario than anywhere else, and inventories piled up way more than everywhere else in BC and Ontario, which is why we don't see the price pressures coming back in those places this year almost at all. So that's what's exceptional about them, is that they're very expensive and more interest rate sensitive.
Our for example, in Kelowna, I think the average for last month was like 1.03 mil. And then our neighboring city in Vernon's close to like $800,000. And Vernon's a city of 60,000. Kelowna's like 160.
Neat detail within that is that Vancouver actually didn't. Do you think that, if it's based on price, that Vancouver would drop the most, followed by Toronto? But it was actually Toronto. Vancouver held up better than most people would have thought, and it just goes to show in a market that expensive that people are buying with wealth. They're not buying with mortgages. So I hope that answers your question.
And if you permit a follow-up, earlier you talked about people from Ontario moving to Alberta because real estate is cheaper in Alberta than in Ontario. What, if any, figures do you have for British Columbians moving to other places in Canada because of real estate? Thank you.
Sure. Well, British Columbians are moving to Alberta as well from the Lower Mainland for the very same reasons. Earlier in COVID, one of the big trends was people moving from all over Canada to interior BC. That interior BC was not expensive before COVID. It was one of those places in the early days of COVID when you didn't have to go to.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at right now. Like it's. Well, here let's. Interior Okanagan here. So prior to COVID, if we were to look at our market stats and our average home price, so July 2020, so coming into the end of that year or whatever was kind of when the pandemic started, right? So we were sitting at about $500,000 was your average, and look at that jump. It's insane, absolutely insane, and that's just the Okanagan. Like, look at that jump. It's down now. Wow, we took a big hit over the last little bit. Let's look at Vancouver. Yeah, see, that's just wild. Went from Okanagan prices. Like, that's what the Okanagan's at now. Wow, that's crazy. So yeah, we're in a little bit of a different market over here.
Work anymore, so people went to live where they like to vacation, which is ski country and by the ocean. But the Lower Mainland.
We're actually noticing a lot of these people are starting to move away from the places that they moved to.
And it's facing the exact same sort of issues as the GTA, where young people cannot afford. They're saying, I'm never going to be able to afford a home here, so I'm out of here. But it's really the same trend we've been watching for 15 years. It's just, 10 years ago, it was like, I can't afford to live in Toronto, I'm moving to Guelph. And 5 years ago, it was, I can't afford to live in Guelph, I'm moving to London. And Ontario got all filled up, and now I'm moving to Calgary. And I did a symposium in Edmonton where they were saying that they were relatively expensive, and I said, well, you're next. So that's what's going on there. And so, yeah, people in BC are doing the exact same thing that people in the GTA are doing. They're going to the same place.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci, c'est ce qui conclut la conférence de presse.
Thank you.
Well, that was great. I think they touched on some really, really good points. I'm really happy that they did this. I think that's pretty much it. I'm going to call it for this stream. I'm going to screw around with a few ideas about potentially clipping this stuff, and maybe I'll be back on in a little bit for some game streaming. I don't really know what I'm going to be doing with this channel, but we're going to mess around with it, and I am going to probably start doing this quite consistently. So, yeah, I guess if anyone ends up watching this, thanks. I don't expect it, though. Take care. Thanks for tuning into the Hizzy Hustle.